Rain drifted over the hazelnut fields of Oregon as a man in a wheelchair sat behind a diner counter no one else wanted him to have. For nearly a year, every door in town had closed politely in Holt Renwick's face. The only one who never doubted him was an aging German shepherd named Sable. Then, one rainy night, the old dog became obsessed with a spot beneath the diner's wooden floor. What they uncovered there would expose a secret powerful enough to shake an entire town. But the greatest discovery wasn't hidden in the cellar at all. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if stories like this matter to you, we'd be honored if you subscribed. Rain had a way of making Sweet Home look older than it was. It softened the roofs, blurred the traffic lights, and laid a silver hush over the hazelnut orchards west of town. In October, the valley seemed to breathe through wet bark and dark soil. The trees stood in patient rows beneath the low Oregon sky, their leaves turning the color of old brass, their branches dripping as if the whole land had been remembering something too long. Holt Renwick had come back to that rain with half a body that still obeyed him, and half that no longer did. He was 44 years old, though some mornings the mirror made that number feel merciful. His shoulders were still broad, his arms were still strong from years of hauling himself from bed to chair, from chair to truck, from truck to whatever doorway waited to decide whether he belonged there. If he stood, he would have been about 6 feet tall, maybe a little more, but standing had become a measurement from another life. The accident had happened during a training jump, not in some desert firefight, not in a blaze of glory worthy of a folded flag or a commander's speech. A bad drift, a violent landing. A moment when the sky, which had carried him for years, suddenly dropped him like an unwanted secret. People had called him lucky. Holt never knew what to do with that word. His sister Mara used it once in the hospital, then never again. She was 49, a part-time nurse at the local clinic, with tired blue-gray eyes and hands always faintly dry from sanitizer. Mara loved him with the fierce, practical devotion of someone who had already lost too much sleep to fear. She cooked before he asked. She checked the ramp before he rolled onto it. She placed his medications in a neat plastic organizer and pretended not to hover. She never said he was a burden. That almost made it worse. Every kindness landed softly, like a pillow placed over a flame. "You don't have to go out in this," Mara said that morning, standing near the kitchen sink with a mug of coffee in both hands. Rain stitched silver lines down the window behind her. The little house smelled of toast, damp jackets, and the bitter edge of black coffee. Holt sat at the table in his black wheelchair, the frame scratched along one side where it had met more doorways than kindness. A dark green flannel shirt hung over his broad chest. Beneath it, a charcoal t-shirt stretched across arms that had learned to carry what his legs could not. "I know," he said. Mara looked at the folder on the table. Resumes, a few references, a printed list of places he had not yet asked. Her face changed in the small way people's faces changed when they were trying not to show sorrow. "You already went to Carver's last week." "I remember." "And the warehouse." "I remember that too." "Holt." He looked up. Mara's mouth tightened. She had their mother's mouth when she worried, narrow at the corners, as if holding back a prayer by force. "I'm not saying don't try. I'm just saying you don't have to let this town bruise you every day to prove something." From under the table, Sable lifted his head. The German shepherd was 8 years old, black and deep brown, with a silvering muzzle and a small V-shaped notch missing from the edge of his right ear. His right shoulder stiffened in cold weather. though he hid it with the dignity of an old soldier refusing a cane. He had once worked along the border, trained to find narcotics, hidden cash, and the strange chemical ghosts people tried to bury under coffee grounds and engine grease. Now he watched Holt with amber eyes that missed nothing. Holt reached down and rubbed the dog's head between the ears. Sable leaned into his hand, not eagerly, not like a puppy, but with the grave acceptance of a creature who had chosen his post and would not abandon it. "I'm not proving anything," Holt said. Mara raised one eyebrow. He gave her the smallest crooked smile. "All right, maybe a little." That almost made her laugh, almost. Outside, rain gathered in the gutters and spilled over in trembling streams. Sweet Home waited beyond the windows, a small town tucked into Lynn County, where people remembered your truck before they remembered your name, where old men still measured weather by their knees, where every storefront seemed to know who had failed, who had married, who had come home changed. Holt had spent nearly a year asking that town for work. No one had shouted at him. No one had spat at his wheels. No one had slammed a door. That would have been easier. Instead, they had offered him pity wrapped in careful language. "This position requires a lot of standing. Our back room is pretty narrow. We'd be worried about your safety. You understand, don't you?" He did understand. That was the trouble. He understood every pause, every glance down at the chair before the eyes came back to his face, every handshake that was warm until the subject of payroll appeared. The worst had been Milt Carver at Carver Farm Parts. Milt had shaken Holt's hand with both of his, hard and respectful, the way men did when they wanted to honor a uniform they had never worn. He had called Holt a real American and said the country owed men like him more than it could ever repay. Then he looked toward the aisles of belts, filters, tractor parts, and narrow shelves. "Truth is," Milt had said, tugging at the brim of his old cap, "this place just ain't built for a chair." Not for a man in a chair, Holt had thought. But Milt had not said man. That was the little mercy people gave themselves. By noon, Holt had tried 2 more places. A feed store that did not need help after all. A small insurance office where the manager spoke brightly about keeping his information on file. By 3, rain had soaked the cuffs of his jacket and left cold beads along the metal rims of his wheels. Sable walked beside him through it all. Not ahead. Not behind. Beside. Once, outside the insurance office, a boy pointed at the dog and asked if he was a police dog. His mother pulled him back, embarrassed, but Holt answered before she could apologize. "Retired," he said. The boy looked at Sable's silver muzzle. "Does he miss it?" Holt opened his mouth, then stopped. Sable stared at the boy with such stern importance that the child took half a step behind his mother. "I think," Holt said slowly, "he misses being needed." The boy nodded as if that made perfect sense. For some reason, that small answer stayed with Holt the rest of the afternoon. By 4:30, the sky had lowered into a dark wool blanket. Holt should have gone home. Mara would be watching the clock without admitting it, probably reheating soup and pretending she had not checked her phone twice. But he kept rolling down Main Street, past the pharmacy, the barber shop, the hardware store, and the window of a closed gift shop where ceramic angels smiled at nothing. That was when Sable stopped. Not abruptly, not with alarm. He simply paused beneath the flickering red and blue glow of an old neon sign that read, "Truesdale Diner." The place sat on the corner like a stubborn memory. Its white paint had yellowed. The chrome around the windows had dulled, A narrow awning sagged slightly under the rain. Through the glass, Holt could see red vinyl stools, a long counter, pie stands under glass domes, and warm light falling across a black and white tile floor. Sable looked through the window, then back at Holt. "No," Holt said. "We are not begging for fries." Sable did not wag his tail. That was how Holt knew the dog was serious. The bell above the diner door gave a tired little jangle when Holt pushed inside. Warmth met him first, then the smell. Coffee, fried onions, cinnamon, old wood, and something sweet cooling in the back. It was the kind of smell that made a man remember he had a stomach, and maybe a soul. 3 customers sat at the counter. An elderly couple shared a plate of pie near the window. A trucker in a wet cap stirred his coffee like it had personally disappointed him. Behind the counter stood Opal Truesdale. She was small, somewhere in her 60s, with short silver hair pinned back and a navy apron faded from years of washing. A pencil was tucked behind one ear. Her face had the weathered firmness of someone who had fed more people than had ever thanked her. She looked at Holt, then at Sable, then at the wheels of his chair. Holt waited for the usual shift in expression. It did not come. Instead, she said, "Dog bite?" "Only bad character." The trucker snorted into his coffee. Opal looked at Sable again. "He got papers?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Health inspector already dislikes me. No need to give him poetry." Holt blinked. Opal pointed with her chin toward the end of the counter. "Coffee?" "I was actually wondering if you were hiring." "No." The answer came so fast it almost had mercy in it. Holt nodded once. "Understood." He turned the chair slightly. Opal said, "You any good with numbers?" Holt stopped. Sable sat down. The old diner seemed to quiet by one careful inch. "I can keep a drawer straight," Holt said. "That wasn't the question. I'm good with numbers." "You steal?" "No." "You lie?" "When necessary." One corner of Opal's mouth twitched. "That so?" "In my experience, 'I'm fine' is the most common lie in America." The elderly woman near the window gave a soft laugh. Opal studied him a little longer, and Holt had the strange feeling that she was not looking at the chair, not looking around it, not politely pretending it was invisible. She was looking at him as if the chair were simply one fact among many, like rain, like age, like debt. "There's a cashier drawer," she said. "Day shift, mostly. Some closing if I trust you. Counter's low because my late husband had a bad hip and complained like a wounded opera singer until I had it rebuilt." Holt glanced at the counter. She was right. The register sat lower than most, with space at the end wide enough for his chair. Opal continued, "I need someone who can count cash, read people, write clean notes, and tell me when a customer's smile doesn't match his hands. That part I can do. I don't need charity cases." His jaw tightened before he could stop it. Opal saw it. "Good. Means you heard me. I said I don't need one. I need honest." She reached under the counter, took out a small brass key on a ring, and set it on the worn surface between them. The key looked ordinary. Drawer key, maybe. Register key. Nothing grand. No medal, no flag, no trumpet call from the heavens. Just a little piece of brass lying under diner lights while rain tapped at the windows. Still, Holt stared at it as if it had been pulled from a battlefield. He thought of Mara's careful hands, Milt Carver's lowered eyes, the boy asking if Sable missed being needed, his own reflection in dark storefront glass, a man cut in half by light and weather and the mercy of strangers. Opal tapped the key once with a blunt finger. "I don't hire wheelchairs, mister." Renwick. Holt Renwick. I don't hire wheelchairs, Mr. Renwick. Her eyes stayed on his. I hire the person sitting in one. For a moment, Holt could not answer. Sable rose and moved closer, pressing his shoulder lightly against the wheel of Holt's chair. The old dog's weight was not much, but Holt felt it like an oath. When do you need me? Holt asked. Tomorrow morning, 6:30. If you're late, I'll assume the Navy taught you nothing. They taught me 5 minutes early is late. Then maybe they weren't entirely useless. This time Holt did smile. It was small, crooked, rusted at the hinges, but real. The next morning, the rain had not stopped. It had merely changed its rhythm, softer now, whispering over the hazelnut orchards and along the roofs of Sweet Home. Holt arrived at Truesdale Diner at 6:22 with Sable at his side, and Mara's worried text still unanswered in his pocket. Opal unlocked the door without ceremony. She handed him a ledger, showed him the register, pointed out which regulars paid cash, which forgot their wallets, and which ones should never be allowed to start a tab unless the Lord himself co-signed it. At 6:30, the first customers came in shaking rain from their jackets. Holt took his place behind the low counter. Sable lay beneath him, silver muzzle resting on his paws, amber eyes facing the door. Outside, Oregon rain washed the windows clean and blurred the world beyond them. Inside, coffee steamed, bacon hissed, plates clattered, and the old diner woke like a hearth that had refused to die. Holt Renwick looked down at the brass key in his palm before sliding it into the register. For the first time in longer than he cared to count, he was not being stored away for safekeeping. He was needed. And beneath the counter, Sable gave one quiet breath, as if the old dog already knew that some doors did not open with strength. Some opened because one tired soul finally recognized another. By the end of his first week at Truesdale Diner, Holt Renwick understood that the place did not run on coffee. Coffee helped, of course. It kept the truckers awake, softened the old men before sunrise, and gave Opal something to pour when she did not want to answer a question. But the diner itself ran on older fuel: habit, memory, gossip, mercy, and the stubborn human need to sit somewhere warm while rain scratched at the windows. Every morning, the bell above the door began its tired song before dawn. Farmers came in smelling of damp wool and orchard mud, their hands rough from hazelnut harvest and machinery. A retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Bellamy ordered tea, then complained about it with the devotion of a priest reciting scripture. 2 log truck drivers took the same booth every Tuesday and argued about weather, politics, and which brand of pie crust represented the downfall of American civilization. Opal remembered every order. She also remembered who could pay. Holt learned that on Thursday, when a young mother came in with 2 children and ordered 1 bowl of oatmeal, 3 spoons, and water, Opal brought out pancakes instead, cut them into small moons, and told the woman someone had made too many. The mother's mouth trembled. "Opal, I can't." "You can chew," Opal said. "Start there." She never wrote it down in the customer ledger, not where anyone could see. But later, while Holt balanced the drawer, he noticed a small mark on a separate pad near the register. 3 short pencil lines beneath the word rain. "What's that?" he asked. "Forecast." "It's not raining pancakes." Opal took the pad from him and slipped it into her apron pocket. "You count cash. I count weather." That was the end of the discussion. Holt did not push. He was beginning to understand that Opal's kindness wore boots and carried a broom. If mercy entered her diner, it had better be willing to work. Sable understood the place faster than Holt did. The German shepherd chose a spot beneath the low end of the counter where he could see the front door, the kitchen pass-through, and Holt's wheels. He did not beg. He did not wander. He lay with his silvered muzzle on his paws and watched the room with amber eyes so solemn that more than one customer lowered their voice without knowing why. Children adored him from a distance. Old men respected him as if he had once outranked them. Opal tolerated him with the official coldness of a woman who secretly cut bacon scraps into tiny pieces when no one was watching. "You're spoiling my dog," Holt told her one morning. Opal did not look up from slicing pie. "Your dog is a better customer than half this town. He doesn't pay. He doesn't complain about the coffee. He can't drink coffee, which makes him wiser than half this town." From behind Holt came a bright voice. "If that dog ever learns to hold a mug, I'm quitting. I refuse to be replaced by a fur-covered tax inspector." Holt turned. The young woman, carrying 2 plates in one hand and a coffee pot in the other, moved through the diner as if the floor had given her a private map. She was in her late 20s, with chestnut hair tied half back, freckles across her nose, and a red wine-colored apron over a cream t-shirt. A small metal name tag read, "Lacey." She set one plate in front of Mrs. Bellamy and another before a man who had been staring mournfully into his eggs. "Fresh coffee?" she asked Holt, lifting the pot. "I'm working." That was not a no. I already had one. That was also not a no. Opal, without turning, said, "Ward, stop caffeinating my cashier. I need him accurate." Lacey Ward gave Holt a conspiratorial look. "She says that because last month I counted the drawer and somehow invented $12. "Found or lost?" Holt asked. Philosophically, found. Legally unclear. Mrs. Bellamy made a disapproving sound over her tea, which meant she was enjoying herself. Lacey had come from Portland 2 months earlier, according to Opal, though no one seemed to know why. She worked fast, talked faster, and joked when the air grew too heavy. But Holt noticed the precision beneath the chatter. She knew which customer needed the check left quietly, which one wanted conversation, which one would flirt harmlessly, and which one should never be allowed near the tip jar. She also did something few people managed. She forgot about Holt's chair without pretending not to see it. If she needed him to check an order, she placed it on the counter in front of him. If he misread a receipt, she argued. If his wheel blocked the pass-through, she said, "Move your chariot, Captain. Eggs are dying." The first time she said it, Holt looked up sharply. Lacey froze, coffee pot hovering mid-air. "Too much?" He studied her face. She was not pitying him, not testing him. She was merely afraid she had stepped on a bruise. Sable lifted his head, watching both of them. After a moment, Holt moved his chair back 6 inches. "The eggs have my condolences." Lacey exhaled, then grinned. "Good. I'd hate to apologize before lunch." That small exchange settled something between them. Not friendship yet, something less decorative and more useful. Trust, perhaps, in its earliest work clothes. The diner began to fit around Holt. Not perfectly, nothing did. The hallway to the restroom was tight. The storage shelves were too high. The old tile near the kitchen threshold caught his front wheel if he came at it wrong. Yet the work gave shape to his hours. He learned the register, the rhythm of breakfast rush, the names of regulars, the way Opal's pencil tapped faster when bills were due. He also learned that people brought more than hunger into a diner. They brought secrets folded under napkins. A man with grease under his nails paid for 2 coffees, but drank 1. A widow ordered pie she did not eat because her late husband used to love it. A teenage boy sat alone after school and counted coins twice before ordering fries. Opal saw all of it. Lacey softened what she could. Holt watched, and in watching, felt some old part of himself sit upright. In the teams, he had learned to read doors, windows, hands, silence. At Truesdale Diner, he learned to read sugar packets, wet coats, unpaid tabs, and the sorrow hidden inside routine. It was not the same battlefield, but it was not nothing. On Friday afternoon, the rain stopped long enough for sunlight to slide pale and thin across Main Street. The diner had quieted after lunch. Opal stood at the counter with a stack of invoices, her pencil tucked behind one ear. Holt was reconciling the morning drawer when he noticed the change in her hands. They did not tremble. Opal did not tremble. But the pencil stopped moving. The bell above the door rang once. A man stepped inside carrying the weather with him, though his coat was dry. He was in his late 50s, trim, clean, and dressed too well for a place where coffee came in thick white mugs. His charcoal wool coat looked soft enough to insult the vinyl stools. Silver threaded his neatly parted hair. His smile was small, practiced, and as pale as winter light on a knife. Every conversation in the diner lowered by half a note. Not stopped. That would have been too honest. Lacey's expression changed first. The humor went out of her face as if someone had blown out a candle. Opal set one invoice down. "Roy," she said. "Opal." The man removed his gloves, finger by finger. "Place looks busy. People still eat when it rains." "I hear they do." His eyes moved over the room and reached Holt with a brief, polite pause. It was a small look. Almost nothing. But Holt had spent too many years measuring threat by almost nothing. "And this must be your new employee," the man said. "Holt Renwick," Opal replied. "My cashier." The word "my" landed harder than Holt expected. Roy Detweiler extended a hand. Councilman Roy Detweiler. "Welcome to Sweet Home, Mr. Renwick." Holt shook it. Detweiler's grip was dry, careful, neither strong nor weak. A man who had practiced not revealing pressure. "Former Navy, I hear," Detweiler said. "Former SEAL." "Impressive," Detweiler smiled. "We appreciate service in this town." Holt had heard that sentence before. It usually arrived just before a door closed. "Appreciation is popular," Holt said. "Less paperwork." A flash moved through Detweiler's eyes, there and gone. Lacey coughed into her fist, like she was hiding a laugh. Opal did not smile, but the pencil behind her ear shifted when her jaw tightened. Detweiler turned back to Opal. "I only came by to remind you of Tuesday's council meeting. The renewal corridor will be discussed again." "This diner isn't for sale. I don't recall asking that." "You never ask anything straight." The air around the counter sharpened. Detweiler sighed with theatrical patience. "Opal, no one wants to take anything from you. The town is growing. Main Street needs drainage work, safer sidewalks, upgraded storefront access. Grants don't wait forever. Neither do vultures." Mrs. Bellamy stopped stirring her tea. Detweiler's smile survived. Only just. "You always did have Earl's stubborn streak," he said. At the mention of her husband, something in Opal's face closed. Not fear exactly. A door shutting over an old room. Detweiler lowered his voice, but not enough. "Old papers can become complicated when people insist on standing in the way of progress." Holt's hand rested on the drawer key. He did not move. Sable did. The German shepherd rose beneath the counter without sound. His body came between Holt's chair and Detweiler's legs, not aggressive, not lunging, simply present. His nose lifted. He drew in one slow breath. Detweiler noticed. For the first time since entering, his smile reached its limit. "Handsome animal," he said. "Sable," Holt said. "Retired too." "Depends who's asking." Detweiler looked at Holt as if deciding whether a man in a chair was worth disliking. Before he could answer, the back door opened. A broad-shouldered man in a brown work jacket leaned halfway into the diner, bringing with him the smell of rainwater, cold tobacco, and machine oil. His cap read Rusk Civic Renewal in block letters. He had a thick neck, a reddish face, and hands that looked more used to breaking boards than signing contracts. "Roy," he called. "You coming?" Detweiler did not turn immediately. "In a moment, Cal." Cal Rusk's eyes skimmed the diner and stopped on Sable. The dog's ears lifted. Not fully, just enough. Then Sable gave a low sound, not quite a growl, too quiet for most of the room. Holt felt it more than heard it, a vibration through the air near his knee. Cal's mouth twisted. "Dog don't like me." "Dogs are honest that way," Lacey said before anyone could stop her. Cal stared at her. Opal snapped. "Lacey, check table 4. "There is no table 4. "Then invent one." Lacey took the hint and moved, though her eyes stayed alert. Detweiler slipped his gloves back on. "We'll talk soon, Opal." "No, you'll talk. I'll listen until I'm bored." Another almost smile tugged at Holt's mouth. Detweiler leaned slightly toward the counter. His voice became soft enough that only those close could hear. "You should consider what Earl would have wanted." Opal's fingers curled around the invoice. For the first time, Holt saw not the iron woman who ran the diner, but the widow beneath the apron, struck in a place no law could name. Then Detweiler straightened, glanced down at Sable, and said with a little laugh, "Old dogs should know when to lie still." Sable's amber eyes did not blink. Holt looked up at Roy Detweiler. His voice came out calm, almost mild. "You should be grateful he is." The silence that followed was brief, but it changed the room. Detweiler gave Holt one last, clean smile. Then he left with Cal Rusk, the bell above the door jangling after them like a nervous little witness. For several seconds, no one spoke. The diner resumed slowly. Forks touched plates, coffee poured. Rain began again outside, tapping at the glass as if it had only been waiting for permission. Opal picked up the invoice she had been holding and found that the corner had bent in her grip. Holt noticed. So did Lacey. Opal noticed them noticing and scowled. "Both of you suddenly allergic to work?" Lacey lifted the coffee pot. "No, ma'am. Deeply committed to coffee-based capitalism." "Then commit somewhere else." Lacey went. Holt stayed quiet until the customers drifted back into their conversations. Then he looked at Opal. "Who was Earl?" he asked. For a moment he thought she would shut him down. Instead, Opal took the pencil from behind her ear and rolled it between her fingers. "My husband," she said. Holt waited. He had a bad hip, a worse heart, and a gift for believing men who smiled while holding papers. She looked toward the door Detweiler had used. "He borrowed money to keep this place alive. Thought he was saving me trouble." "Detweiler?" Opal's mouth hardened. "Among others. Mostly him." "Is the debt legal?" "That depends on who reads it." Holt understood more than she had said. Paper could be a chain. He had seen men use contracts like barbed wire and signatures like bullets that took years to hit. Sable remained standing, still facing the door. Opal looked down at him. "Your dog always judge people that hard?" only when they deserve it. He judged the health inspector. He deserved it. That got a dry breath from her. Not quite a laugh, but close enough to warm the counter. Holt returned to the ledger, though the numbers had changed shape in his mind. The diner was no longer just a job. It had edges now, pressure points, names attached to shadows. Across the room, Lacey refilled Mrs. Bellamy's tea and glanced back at him. For once, she did not make a joke. Outside, Roy Detweiler and Cal Rusk crossed Main Street beneath the gray afternoon, their reflections broken in the wet pavement. Detweiler walked with a councilman's calm. Cal moved like a man who knew where back doors were. Beneath the counter, Sable slowly lay down again. But he did not lower his head. Holt noticed that too. After closing, Truesdale Diner became a different creature. By day, it lived loudly. Plates rang against the pass-through. Coffee hissed in glass pots. Forks scraped, regulars argued, Lacey Ward made jokes too fast for Opal's patience, and Sable watched the front door, as if the fate of the Republic depended on who ordered pancakes. But after the last customer left and the neon sign in the window went dark, the diner settled into its bones. The booths sighed. The old refrigerator hummed in the back. Rain tapped the roof in 1,000 small fingers. Holt Renwick sat behind the low counter with the day's receipts spread before him, his black wheelchair angled so he could reach the register, the ledger, and the calculator Opal insisted was more trustworthy than any phone. "Numbers don't lie," Opal said from the other side of the counter. Holt looked at the receipt tape in his hand. "People enter numbers. That's why I don't trust people. You hired me. I said what I said." She stood with one hip against the counter, a dish towel over her shoulder, her navy apron marked with flour and coffee. The pencil behind her ear had been sharpened down to a stub. At 64, Opal Truesdale had the kind of tiredness that did not ask for rest. It simply became part of her posture. Lacey moved between tables, stacking ketchup bottles and wiping laminated menus. Her cardigan hung on the back of a chair, sleeves rolled up, hair slipping loose from its tie. She had been quieter than usual since Roy Detweiler's visit 2 days earlier. Not silent exactly. Lacey did not seem built for silence, but her jokes came with a half-second delay now, as if she were checking the windows before letting them out. At the rear of the diner, under the weak yellow light near the kitchen, Gus Okafor knelt beside the sink cabinet with a flashlight between his teeth. Gus was 67, broad through the shoulders and round through the middle, with close-cropped silver hair and a thick gray mustache that gave him the look of a retired king disguised as a plumber. His tool belt sat heavy around his waist. A dark denim shirt stretched across his back as he leaned into the cabinet, muttering to a pipe as if scolding an old friend. "This valve," he said around the flashlight, "has the moral character of a raccoon." Lacey looked over. "Do raccoons have bad morals?" "They know what they did." Holt wrote the dinner total into the ledger. "You find the leak?" "I found 3 leaks, 2 lies, and 1 previous repair performed by a man who should have been arrested for crimes against plumbing." Opal snorted. "That man was my cousin." Gus removed the flashlight from his mouth. "Then I admire your family loyalty in these trying times." The small humor warmed the empty diner without brightening it too much. Holt liked Gus immediately. Not because the man was friendly, though he was. Not because he knew how to fill a room without taking it over, though he did. Holt liked him because Gus noticed things and did not announce every noticing. His eyes had a habit of pausing on corners, seams, water stains, uneven floorboards. A man like that did not simply fix pipes. He remembered what a building had tried to hide. Sable lay near Holt's chair, but not fully relaxed. The German shepherd's silvered muzzle rested on his paws, yet his ears shifted at every sound from the back room. His right shoulder had been stiff all evening because of the rain. Holt had seen it in the slight change of gait, the careful way Sable lowered himself. "You're getting old," Holt had murmured earlier. Sable had looked at him with such offended dignity that Lacey nearly dropped a plate laughing. Now the dog's eyes tracked Gus as the old plumber stood and stretched his knees. I'm telling you," Gus said, wiping his hands on a rag. "These improvement contracts Detweiler keeps bragging about? Something smells wrong." Opal's gaze sharpened. "You mean politically wrong or sewer wrong?" "In my line of work, those overlap more than you'd think." Lacey came closer, clutching a stack of menus against her chest. "You worked on one of those projects, didn't you?" 3. Gus tucked the rag into his belt. Main Street drainage, community hall restrooms, alley line behind the pharmacy. Invoices said full replacement. What I saw was patchwork, fresh paint, and numbers wearing Sunday clothes. Holt stopped writing. Gus noticed. The older man's voice lost its teasing edge. "I've been fixing pipes in this town since before half the council learned to spell grant money. Detweiler's name shows up around too many clean invoices for dirty jobs." Opal folded the towel slowly. "Careful," she said. Gus gave her a sad, knowing look. "I have been careful for 15 years. It has not made me younger." That line settled over the counter. Not dramatic. Worse. True. Holt looked down at the ledger, but the neat columns had begun to feel like the surface of a pond, hiding black water underneath. Roy Detweiler had walked into the diner with a smile and left fingerprints on the air. Now Gus was giving those fingerprints a shape. Sable lifted his head. At first, Holt thought the dog had heard something outside. Rain had grown heavier, rattling against the back windows and drumming on the alley awning. The diner's old bones creaked as wind pressed along the wall. Then Sable stood. Not fast. Deliberate. His ears rose, his nose angled toward the storeroom behind the kitchen. Holt watched him. "Sable," he said softly. The dog did not look back. He moved past the counter, across the black and white tile, through the kitchen doorway, and stopped at the storeroom threshold. The storeroom smelled of flour, canned tomatoes, onions, damp cardboard, machine oil from the old ice maker, and the faint sourness old buildings developed when rain found places to linger. Shelves leaned against the walls under the weight of bulk sugar, paper napkins, coffee filters, and jars of pickles. The floorboards back there were older than the tile in front, wide planks darkened by decades of spills, scrubbing, and Oregon weather. Sable lowered his head. He inhaled. Once. Twice. Then he began to scratch. The sound tore through the empty diner. Not a polite pawing, not curiosity. His front claws struck one section of floor near the far wall with hard, frantic purpose. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Opal snapped. "Hey, no, absolutely not." Holt wheeled out from behind the counter, moving toward the kitchen. "Sable, leave it." The dog stopped for half a breath and looked at him. That look caught Holt in the chest. He had seen it before in places very far from Oregon. In a dark shipping yard, beside a parked truck with false panels, near a stack of crates that looked harmless until Sable's predecessor had frozen in front of them. Working dogs had a language. Not words, not magic, not mystery. Training, instinct, trust. A message delivered through posture and refusal. This was not misbehavior. This was a report. Holt's hand settled on his wheel rim. Opal. He's tearing up my floor. He found something. Sable finds bacon under tables. He doesn't look at me like that for bacon. Lacey had gone pale, but her voice came quick and thin. That is both terrifying and strangely flattering to the bacon. No one laughed. Gus took his flashlight and stepped into the storeroom. Let me see. Sable backed away only when Holt gave a quiet hand signal. Even then, the German shepherd remained standing, body tense, eyes fixed on the scratched patch of wood. Gus crouched, knees popping. He ran one hand across the floorboards, then knocked his knuckles against the plank. A dull wooden note answered. He shifted 6 inches and knocked again. This time the sound came back hollow. The diner seemed to hold its breath. Gus looked up at Opal. How old did you say this building was? I didn't. I'm asking now. Opal's mouth tightened. For the first time that night, her iron face showed reluctance not born from anger, but memory. My father said it was a general store before it was a diner, she said. Back in the 20s, maybe earlier. Gus knocked again. Hollow. He ever say anything about a cellar? Opal looked toward the shelves, toward the wall, toward some ghost no one else could see. He told stories, she said. Old men tell stories. What kind of stories? Holt asked. She took the pencil from behind her ear, then seemed to forget why she had done it. Bootleggers. Dry years. Men moving bottles through the valley. My father said there was a storage space under the back room once, but Earl and I never found a door. We thought it was just one of those tales people tell to make a small town feel less small. Lacey whispered. A prohibition cellar under a diner? Opal shot her a look. Do not sound excited. If there is a dead raccoon under there, you're removing it. Gus brushed dust from a seam in the boards. No raccoon built this. He found the edge after 10 more minutes. It had been hidden under grime, wax, and the slight warping of planks. A rectangular outline, almost invisible unless the light struck it low. Gus used a small pry bar from his belt, working carefully, not forcing. Opal objected 3 times. Lacey fetched more towels. Holt positioned himself in the kitchen doorway, frustrated by the narrow storeroom entrance that kept him from getting closer. His chair could not pass between the shelf of canned goods and the ice machine. The fact struck harder than it should have. Not because he needed to be first through every door. He had given up that foolishness, or told himself he had. But the old current rose in him anyway. A mission had appeared, and his body had become terrain he could not cross. Sable glanced back at him. Holt swallowed the bitterness. All right, he said, voice shifting into something calmer, firmer. Nobody rushes, nobody reaches in blind. Gus, if it gives, step back. Lacey, light from the side, not straight down. Opal, shut off the kitchen breaker for the back room. Opal stared at him. He met her eyes. Please. Something in the word worked where command might not have. She nodded once and went to the breaker panel. The lights in the storeroom died. Lacey's phone flashlight and Gus's beam became 2 pale blades in the dark. The plank lifted with a long, sticky groan. Beneath it was not open earth, but a trapdoor. Old wood. Iron ring. Dust packed deep around the edges. Lacey whispered something that might have been a prayer or a Portland curse. Gus hooked 2 fingers through the iron ring and pulled. The trapdoor resisted, then gave way with a sigh of stale air rising from below. The smell came first. Cold earth, old wood, rust, mold, glass, And beneath it, faint but unmistakable to Holt after years around seizures of hidden currency and smuggled goods, plastic storage, paper kept too dry, and money. Sable gave one low breath. Not a growl, confirmation. Gus aimed his flashlight down. Stone steps descended into darkness. Nobody moved. Rain hammered the roof as if trying to get in. Holt felt the old part of himself stand up inside the chair. "Do not go down yet," he said. Gus froze with one boot angled toward the opening. Opal turned. "What?" "Nobody goes down yet." Holt's voice was quiet, but it cut cleanly. "We don't know if the steps hold. We don't know what's down there. We don't touch anything we don't have to touch." Lacey looked at him. "You think this is criminal?" "I think your dog doesn't tear up a floor for nostalgia." "My dog?" Opal said. Holt almost smiled. "Tonight he's civic property." Gus stepped back from the opening. Holt pointed to the counter. "Lacey, take photos from up here. Wide first, then the stairs, then anything visible below. No flash if it washes out the labels." She nodded quickly and began taking pictures, her hand shaking only once. Gus lay flat on his stomach with a flashlight, careful not to cross the threshold. The beam moved over stone, broken shelves, old bottles clouded with dust. Then it stopped. "Well," Gus said softly, "that ain't from the 20s. "What?" Opal demanded. His flashlight held on a corner of the cellar floor. A black waterproof storage box sat beneath a collapsed shelf. Beside it were several sealed plastic bags bundled tight, and what looked like a ledger wrapped in clear protective film. Old bottles surrounded them like dead witnesses. Lacey covered her mouth. Opal whispered, "No." Holt's pulse slowed. That was how it had always happened when danger became real. Fear did not vanish. It organized. "Lacey," he said, "photo." She took 3. "Closer if your zoom can handle it. Do not step down." "I'm not stepping anywhere. My knees have resigned." Gus moved the beam slightly. There were more boxes farther back. Modern, dry, placed there by someone who expected the cellar to remain forgotten. Opal gripped the doorframe. "How long has that been under my diner?" No one answered, because the truth was worse than not knowing. Holt turned his chair carefully, looking back through the kitchen toward the front windows. Main Street was dark and wet. No faces pressed against the glass. No headlights paused outside. Still, he felt observed. "Do you have a back entrance to this space?" he asked. Opal shook her head too fast. "No." Gus did not answer. Holt saw it. "Gus." The old plumber rubbed his jaw. "There's an alley wall behind this room. Bricked over in places. I've seen old service doors sealed and forgotten in buildings like this." Opal looked sick. Holt nodded once. "We close it back as much as we can. We keep the photos. We write down time, date, who was here. Nobody talks about this in the dining room. Nobody calls town police tonight." Lacey lowered her phone. "Why not?" Holt looked at Opal. She understood before he spoke. "Detweiler," she said. Gus's face darkened. "Council has friends everywhere." "Then we go around town," Holt said. "County level. Someone outside his reach." Lacey stared at the photos on her phone, thumb swiping carefully. Holt could see the pale reflection of the screen on her face. She stopped moving. Her expression changed. "What?" Opal asked. Lacey zoomed in with 2 fingers. Once, twice. Her voice came out smaller than usual. "There's a label on the folder behind the box." She turned the phone so they could see. The image was grainy but readable, caught at the edge of Gus's flashlight beam. A white folder, sealed in plastic, wedged beside the waterproof box. Across its tab, in printed block letters, were the words, Sweet Home Renewal Corridor Phase 2. No one spoke. The diner around them seemed suddenly too old, too thin, too easily broken. Above the cellar, rain fell on the roof. Beneath the floor, the past lay open with modern teeth. Sable moved to Holt's side and leaned against his wheel. This time, Holt did not tell him to move. He looked at the photo, then at Opal, then at the dark opening under the storeroom floor. What had been buried under the diner was not history. It was still breathing. By morning, the diner looked almost innocent again. That was the cruel thing about old buildings. They could hide their sins beneath clean counters and fresh coffee. They could let sunlight fall across red vinyl stools, let bacon hiss on the grill, let regulars argue about weather and baseball, while under the storeroom floor a sealed throat waited in the dark. Holt Renwick noticed every sound now, the clatter of cups, the soft drag of Opal's shoes behind the counter, the rain tapping at the windows, the hollow memory beneath the floorboards. They had lowered the trap door back into place before midnight, settled the old planks as carefully as possible, and stacked 2 flour sacks over the seam. Holt had written everything down. Time discovered, who was present, what was touched, what was not touched, what photographs were taken, where each person had stood. His handwriting had stayed steady. That surprised him less than it once might have. Danger had always made him calm. It was safety that had become difficult. Opal moved through the breakfast rush with her usual hard efficiency, but the pencil behind her ear remained unsharpened. Lacey Ward kept smiling too brightly, pouring coffee with a hand that only trembled when she thought no one could see. Gus Okafor returned before 8 under the excuse of checking the sink valve again, though the valve had behaved itself for once in its questionable life. Sable lay beneath Holt's counter, muzzle silver against his paws, eyes open. He had not slept much. Neither had Holt. At 10:15, after the rush thinned and Mrs. Bellamy left exactly 11 cents under her saucer, as if tipping were a legal protest, Opal locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. Lacey stood near the register. We're closing between breakfast and lunch now? Opal pulled the blinds halfway down. Temporary plumbing emergency. Gus lifted a wrench. I am always honored to be used as an alibi. Holt opened the folder beside him. Inside were Lacey's printed photos, his handwritten notes, a rough sketch of the storeroom, and a list of names he had copied from visible labels in the cellar images. Rusk Civic Renewal. Sweet Home Renewal Corridor. Phase 2. A waterproof box, plastic-wrapped ledgers, bundled cash, modern secrets sleeping among dead bottles. Opal stared at the photos as if looking at a diagnosis. That cellar wasn't supposed to be real, she said. Gus stood with his arms crossed, his face more serious than Holt had seen it. Old towns are full of real things. People turn into stories because stories don't require paperwork. Holt tapped one photo. The question is access. Opal looked at him. If nobody inside the diner knew about the trap door, somebody else had a way in. Gus nodded slowly. Alley wall. They went to the back of the building after Lacey checked that no one was loitering near the windows. Rain had paused, but everything outside still glistened. The alley behind Truesdale Diner was narrow, paved in cracked concrete, with moss pushing up through the seams. Garbage bins sat near the rear door. Beyond them, the old brick wall wore decades of patched paint and water stains. Gus ran his hand along the bricks near the storeroom corner. This section, he said. See the difference? Holt rolled closer, tires whispering over damp concrete. The lower bricks near the foundation were a slightly different shade, not enough for most people to notice. A rectangle, maybe 5 feet high, had been patched long ago. Service door, Gus said. Could have been bricked over. Could also be that somebody made it look bricked over. Lacey swallowed. That's a very unfriendly sentence. Opal folded her arms. Cal Rusk did work on the foundation after the flood 8 years ago. Gus turned to her. You never told me that. I didn't hire him. Earl did. Her voice hardened around her husband's name, but the hardness was there to protect something bruised. Water got under the back room. Earl said Roy knew a contractor who would do it cheap. Cal, Holt said. Opal nodded. The air shifted. Not because they had solved the whole thing. They had not. But the shape had begun to emerge. Cal Rusk opening a forgotten vein beneath the diner. Roy Detweiler learning there was a hidden place under a woman's struggling business. The two of them deciding that no one would ever look there, because no one ever looked closely at people they believed were powerless. Opal looked at the patched bricks as if they had betrayed her. He's been under my floor, she said. No one answered. There are violations that do not leave bruises. Holt knew that. A door opened without permission. A room entered in secret. A life treated as storage space for another man's crime. Opal's diner had not merely been threatened, it had been used. Back inside, Holt asked for the old repair file. Opal resisted for half a minute, which for her counted as a long, emotional crisis. Then she went into the tiny office behind the kitchen and returned with a dented metal box full of receipts, loan papers, tax letters, grease-stained envelopes, and grief. She set it on the counter harder than necessary. There, she said, the Museum of Bad Decisions. Holt did not reach for it at first. You don't have to show me everything. If Roy Detweiler can wave my husband's papers in my face, I can survive you reading them. Lacey stood quietly beside the coffee machine. Gus removed his cap. Holt opened the box. Earl Truesdale appeared through paper before he appeared through stories. A shaky signature. A handwritten note about a new walk-in cooler. A receipt for foundation repair after flood damage. A loan agreement with phrasing that made Holt's jaw tighten. Roy Detweiler's name was not always at the top. That was the clever part. Sometimes it appeared through a holding company. Sometimes through a private note. Sometimes as a witness. Sometimes not at all, though his shadow leaned over every page. Holt separated papers into groups. Repair, loan, tax, contractor, unknown. Lacey began labeling sticky notes. Gus identified work that had been billed but never properly done. Opal watched all of it with her arms crossed. Finally, she said, Earl thought he was saving me. Holt looked up. He had a bad heart, bad hip, worse pride. He didn't want me worrying. Every time something broke, he found a way to patch it. Every time money got short, he said he handled it. Her mouth twisted. Then he died in the kitchen before lunch service, and I found out he'd handled me right into a cage. The diner was silent except for the refrigerator's low hum. Sable rose from beneath the counter and walked to Opal. He did not nudge her. He did not perform affection. He simply sat beside her shoes, straight-backed and solemn, as if standing guard over a grief no one else had permission to touch. Opal looked down at him. For a moment, the old woman's face lost its armor. Then she cleared her throat and pointed at Holt. If that dog sheds on my floor, I'm billing the Navy. Holt's smile was small. He was never Navy. Then I'll bill whoever taught him that face. That might be God. God already owes me for 3 husbands' worth of plumbing. Lacey blinked. 3? 1 legal, 2 emotional. Gus put his cap back on. I would like it stated for the record that I was never one of the emotional husbands. You couldn't afford the application fee. The laughter that followed was brief but real. It did not solve anything. It only reminded them they were still alive inside the problem. By noon, Holt made the call. He did not call Sweet Home Police. Not yet. Detweiler had too many hands inside too many rooms. Instead, he asked Gus for the name of someone at the county level who still cared more about evidence than invitations to council dinners. Gus gave him one. Deputy Sheriff Elena Marquez arrived at 1:40 p.m. in an unmarked county SUV, parking behind the diner instead of out front. She came through the kitchen door wearing a dark rain jacket over her uniform, black hair tied in a low knot, face calm in a way that did not invite performance. She was 38, maybe, with steady eyes and the patience of someone who had heard too many stories that began with, "You have to believe me." She did not ask to see the cellar first. That made Holt trust her more. She asked for names, times, photos, who had touched what, why they had not called town police, whether anyone else knew. When Lacey began talking too fast, Elena held up one hand. Not rude, just enough. "One at a time," she said. "Good facts do not improve when rushed." Holt appreciated that. Opal did not. "I'm not on trial," Opal snapped. Elena looked at her. "No, ma'am. I'm trying to make sure the people who are do not walk because we got sloppy." That settled Opal more effectively than comfort would have. Holt handed Elena the folder. She studied the photos without expression, but her eyes slowed at the waterproof box, the ledger, the visible folder tab. "Sweet Home Renewal Corridor," she murmured. "You know it?" Holt asked. "I know enough to know people get very proud when grant money starts wearing a ribbon." She took notes in a small black notebook, not her phone. Holt noticed the dots she made in the margin whenever a detail did not sit right. 1 dot beside Cal Rusk, 2 beside the foundation repair, 1 beside Detweiler's loan papers, 3 beside the bricked-over alley wall. Elena did not promise an arrest. She did not promise protection. She promised something better. "I can quietly pull county-level filings," she said. "To grant requests, contractor submissions, inspection records. If Detweiler is connected to this directly, we need more than a dog, photos, and suspicion." Sable looked at her. Elena looked back at him. "No offense." "He's heard worse," Holt said. "I also need all of you to stop touching that cellar." "We haven't." "Good. Continue being smarter than television." Lacey lifted a finger. "Can I quote you on that?" "No." Elena closed the folder. "If anyone asks, I came by about a vandalism complaint in the alley. Nothing more. You keep the diner open if you can. Change too much and people notice. But no one goes down. No one moves boxes. No one tries to be brave in a way that ruins evidence." Her gaze rested on Holt as she said the last part. He did not take offense. He nodded. "I know what a contaminated scene costs," he said. "I figured. After she left, the diner felt emptier, not safer, just more officially dangerous." That night, Holt stayed late again. Though Opal told him to go home twice and threatened to make him polish every ketchup bottle in the building if he disobeyed a 3rd time. He finished the ledger, locked the register, and rolled into the quiet dining room after Lacey and Gus had gone. Rain had returned. Sable lay near the front door, But when Holt stopped beside one of the empty booths, the German shepherd rose and came to him. Holt reached down and rubbed the old dog's shoulder. The right one. The bad one. Sable leaned into the touch with a tired sigh. You and me, Holt said softly. Couple of retired assets. Sable's ear flicked. That's what they'd call us on paper. Retired, limited use, not field ready. The words tasted bitter because they were familiar. Holt looked toward the storeroom. He could not go down those steps. He could not crawl through the cellar, lift the boxes, inspect the hidden door, chase Cal Rusk through the alley if it came to that. His body had drawn borders around him, and every border felt like a verdict. Sable placed his head on Holt's knee, not his lap, his knee, the part of him that felt nothing. Holt's throat closed. For a second, anger rose so sharply he almost pushed the dog away. Not because Sable had done wrong, but because tenderness sometimes found the wound too accurately. Holt gripped the wheel rim instead, knuckles whitening. Then Sable looked up. No pity, no confusion, only waiting. The old dog was waiting for a command. Still, after everything. Holt exhaled slowly. You never got the memo, did you? He whispered. Sable held his gaze. Holt rested his hand on the dog's silver muzzle. Good. When Mara picked him up later, she parked beside the diner and came in under a yellow raincoat, worry already written across her face. She took one look at the papers spread near the register, the tension in Opal's shoulders, Sable's alert posture, and Holt's tired eyes. What are you into? She asked. Holt almost lied. Then he remembered what lies had done to Opal. Something ugly, he said, but not something I can walk away from. Mara flinched at the phrase, and he regretted it immediately. I didn't mean... I know what you meant. She looked around the diner, then back at him. Is it dangerous? Yes. Can I stop you? No. Her eyes shone, but she did not cry. Mara had spent too long rationing tears in hospital rooms. Instead, she stepped behind his chair and rested one hand on his shoulder. For months, that touch had felt like a brace. Tonight, for the first time, it felt like permission. Then don't be stupid, she said. Holt smiled faintly. That's your blessing? That's the premium version. Across the street, neither of them saw Roy Detweiler at first. He stood beneath the awning of the closed gift shop, one hand in the pocket of his charcoal coat, the other holding his phone. The rain blurred his reflection in the dark glass behind him. From that distance, he looked like any other councilman watching his town settle for the night. Then Deputy Elena Marquez came out the diner's rear side door and crossed toward her unmarked SUV. Detweiler's smile faded. Only for a moment. But Holt saw it through the front window. So did Sable. The German shepherd stood, silent and rigid, beside the wheelchair. Outside, Detweiler lifted his phone to his ear. The fox had realized the henhouse had learned to count its chickens, and inside Truesdale Diner. Holt Renwick understood that keeping still was no longer the same thing as doing nothing. By noon, Sweet Home had dressed itself like a town trying to forget its debts. Golden string lights hung across Main Street, swaying gently in the damp October air. Paper leaves turned on thin wires above the storefronts. A row of booths sold roasted hazelnuts glazed with honey, pumpkin bread wrapped in wax paper, hot cider steaming in paper cups, and hand-knitted scarves no one admitted were too expensive until they had already bought one. Rain had softened to a mist, the kind Oregon wore like an old shawl. Children ran beneath it with painted cheeks. Old farmers stood in small circles and judged the weather with the solemnity of men reading scripture. A bluegrass trio played beneath a tent near the courthouse steps, their banjo bright enough to make even the gray sky seem mildly embarrassed. Inside Truesdale Diner, there was no room for poetry. There was pie. Hazelnut pie, to be exact. Opal Truesdale's hazelnut pie, which several citizens of Sweet Home treated as a civic institution, a medical necessity, and depending on the hour, a reason not to move away. 2 slices for booth 3, Lacey Ward called, sliding between chairs with a tray balanced high. 1 coffee refill for Mrs. Bellamy, who has informed me this coffee is emotionally disappointing but wants more. Mrs. Bellamy lifted her chin from the corner booth. Accuracy is not disrespect. It is an organ before caffeine, Lacey said. Behind the counter, Holt Renwick rang up an order, counted change, checked the line by the door, and watched every face that entered. The diner was alive in a way he had not seen before. Packed booths, wet jackets, muddy boots, children pressing noses to the pie case, farmers from the hazelnut orchards, truckers, retirees, a young couple splitting 1 bowl of chili and pretending it was enough. Opal moved through it all like a small storm in an apron. Do not stack those plates like that. Who put forks in the spoon bin? If anyone asks for oat milk today, tell them the cow refused to cooperate. There had been a time when Holt might have found the crowd overwhelming in the wrong way. Too many moving bodies, too many hands hidden by coats, too many exits blocked by people who did not understand exits were not decorations. But today, the work gave his attention a shape. The low counter fit him. The register obeyed him. The ledger stayed open by his left hand. Sable lay beneath the end of the counter, where he could see both the front door and the kitchen passage, his silver muzzle resting on his paws, but his amber eyes alert. The dog had not forgotten the cellar. Neither had Holt. None of them had. The trap door remained covered. The flour sacks sat over the seam. Deputy Elena Marquez had told them to keep the diner open, keep behavior normal, keep evidence untouched. Holt understood the wisdom. Change too much, and the wrong people would notice. Still, every time Opal walked past the storeroom, she did not look at the floor. That was how Holt knew she was thinking about nothing else. At 1:30, during a brief lull between the lunch rush and the festival parade, Mara Renwick came in, wearing her yellow raincoat, a paper cup of cider in one hand and worry in the other. "You look tired," she said to Holt. "I'm working, that's the costume." "You always did hate costumes." "I wore camouflage for 20 years." "That was different. You blended in by standing out." Lacey paused beside them with a tray. "That is weirdly deep for a woman holding cider." Mara smiled faintly. "I'm a nurse. We say strange things when blood sugar drops." Sable rose just enough to press his head briefly against Mara's thigh. She touched his ear, careful of the V-shaped notch. "And how's my favorite retired gentleman?" she asked. Holt raised an eyebrow. "I meant Sable." "I heard." "Good." For a few minutes, the fear loosened, not disappeared. Fear never left politely once it had found a chair, but it moved aside enough for the diner to breathe. Then the bell over the door rang. Roy Detweiler entered with sunlight that did not belong to him. He wore a navy blazer, a white shirt, and the smile he used when people were watching. Outside, he had been shaking hands near the festival booths, speaking to orchard owners and retirees about progress, drainage, new sidewalks, safer crossings, a revitalized Main Street. Now he stepped into the diner, as if it were already part of a brochure. Behind him, the festival noise thinned strangely, not because it grew quieter, because Holt began hearing around it. The soft shift of Opal's shoes stopping behind the counter, the scrape of Lacey's tray against her palm, Sable's claws pressing once against the tile. Detweiler removed a cream-colored envelope from inside his jacket. "Opal," he said warmly. "Busy day." "People like pie." "They do. Tradition matters. When it's convenient for speeches." A few customers glanced over, then quickly found interest in their plates. Detweiler's smile held. "I won't keep you. You rarely say true things. Nice change." He placed the envelope on the counter. Holt looked at it. Not thick, not dramatic, just paper. But paper had a way of becoming a blade when held by the wrong hand. Opal did not touch it. "What is that?" she asked. "A final opportunity." Lacey's face hardened. Detweiler lowered his voice, though not enough to keep Holt from hearing. "Sale agreement. Fair offer. Better than fair, considering deferred maintenance, questionable records, and certain tax irregularities that may become difficult to explain if reviewed by the wrong people." Opal stared at him. The wrong people. The thorough people. "My records are clean." "Are they?" His voice softened. Earl was not always careful. For one instant, Holt saw the words land. Opal's shoulders did not slump. Her hands did not shake. But something old and private flinched behind her eyes. Mara noticed too. So did Lacey. Sable stood. Holt gave a low signal, almost nothing. The dog remained in place, but his body turned slightly, placing himself between the counter and Detweiler's knees. Detweiler glanced down. "Still keeping company with old soldiers, I see." Holt said, "Some of us age better than paperwork." The smile thinned. Opal finally picked up the envelope. She did not open it. She folded it in half, then again, slowly, with the precision of someone making a napkin shape at a funeral. Then she tucked it into the front pocket of her navy apron. "Anything else?" she asked. Detweiler's eyes cooled. "End of the week." "For what?" "For choosing whether you want help walking into the future or paperwork dragging you there." Opal lifted the coffee pot and refilled the mug of a man sitting at the counter. Her voice became brisk and public. "Roy, if you're not ordering, you're blocking the pie." The man at the counter froze, unsure whether to breathe. For the first time all day, someone laughed. It came from Mrs. Bellamy's booth. A tiny, delighted sound she immediately disguised as a cough. Detweiler heard it. His face did not change, but the room did. The spell of his polish cracked just enough for ordinary people to see the effort underneath. He inclined his head. "Enjoy the festival." Then he turned and left. When the bell stopped ringing, Opal looked at Holt. "If you say one comforting thing, I'll fire you for seasonal weakness." "I wasn't going to." "Good." "I was going to ask whether you charge extra for threatening councilmen during lunch service." Lacey nearly choked on a laugh. Opal pointed at the register. "Work." The parade began at 2. Main Street filled with music, small tractors decorated with streamers, children in leaf crowns, the high school band playing with admirable courage and flexible rhythm. The diner remained busy, but the crowd shifted toward the windows, toward the front, toward the noise outside. That was when Sable's head rose. Holt saw it before anyone else. The dog did not look toward the front door. He looked toward the kitchen, then the back. His nose lifted, slow and precise. Holt's hand moved to the wheel rim. "Sable," he said quietly. The German shepherd stood. No growl this time. No dramatic bark. That would have been too easy. Instead, Sable moved with terrible focus, past the counter, through the kitchen passage, toward the storeroom. Holt followed as far as the doorway allowed. "What is it?" Lacey asked, appearing beside him. Sable stopped near the rear wall. He did not scratch. He sniffed along the lower boards near the sealed trapdoor, then turned not to the floor, but toward the back door. The alley. Holt's pulse tightened. "Lacey," he said, "lock the back door." She moved immediately. At the same moment, through the small wired glass window in the rear door, Holt saw a shape pass in the alley. A broad shoulder, a brown work jacket, a cap pulled low. Cal Rusk. He was not heading toward the diner's public entrance. He was moving along the patched brick wall beyond the garbage bins toward the section Gus had identified. Holt's voice became flat. "Get Gus." Lacey had one hand on the lock. "He's outside by the cider booth. Now!" She ran. Holt could not. That fact struck him not like sorrow this time, but like math. Distance, chair width, blocked passage, crowd noise, back alley access. He could not chase Cal. He could not force the old wall. He could not be two places at once. But he could still command the room. He wheeled backward fast, returned to the register, and scanned the diner. Opal was carrying 2 plates. Mara stood near the counter. The parade drums thudded outside, covering everything soft and dangerous. Holt said, "Opal." She saw his face and set the plates down without argument. "Cal's in the alley," he said. Sable marked it. Opal's eyes flashed toward the storeroom. For once, she said nothing sharp. Lacey returned with Gus, who looked as if he had been pulled away from an argument with cider. "What happened?" he asked. "Back wall," Holt said. "Cal." Gus's humor vanished. Then Sable made a sound. Not loud. A sharp exhale through his nose, followed by a stiffening of his whole body. He turned from the back door and moved toward the storeroom again, head low, nostrils working. Holt smelled nothing at first. Then something reached him. Faint. So faint it could have been imagination. A chemical bitterness under the warm smell of pie. Gus caught it next. His face changed. "Gas," he said. Opal's hand went to the counter. Lacey whispered, "From the stove?" Gus shook his head. "Lower. Back room, maybe under." The diner noise continued around them. Forks, laughter, children, drums from outside. A whole town celebrating, while a hidden thing began to breathe poison under the floor. Holt did not have the luxury of panic. "Gus," he said, "kill the kitchen burners. Main valve if you can reach it safely. No lights, no switches near the back." Gus moved. "Lacey, front door open. Keep your voice normal. Start moving the elderly customers first." Her eyes widened, then steadied. "Reason?" "Kitchen issue. Free pie across the street." "Opal?" Opal was already moving toward the dining room, her face hard as riverstone. Holt caught her sleeve as she passed. "Not fear," he said. "Authority." She looked at him once. Then she turned to the room and clapped her hands. "All right, everybody," Opal called, voice cutting through the diner like a bell. "We've got a kitchen problem, and I am not losing my reputation because you people refuse to eat pie outdoors. Take your plates. Coffee stays. Pie table across the street in 2 minutes." Mrs. Bellamy frowned. "What kind of kitchen problem?" "Tuny, the kind where you follow instructions instead of conducting a Senate hearing." That moved them. Slowly at first, then faster as Lacey opened the front door and began ushering people out with bright, insistent cheer. "Fresh Air Festival Special," she said. "Everyone who exits calmly gets to feel superior later." Mara helped an older man with a walker. Two teenagers grabbed trays. A trucker lifted a toddler out of a booth. The bluegrass music and parade drums outside swallowed the first edge of alarm. Sable began to bark. Not at the customers. Around them. He moved in a circle, sharp and controlled, driving hesitation toward the door. A child started to cry, and Sable stopped long enough to lower his head near the boy's hand before turning again toward the back with another urgent bark. Holt counted people. Booth 1 empty, counter clear. Window table moving, bathroom. "Mara," he said. "Restroom." She did not ask. She checked, found a teenage girl washing her hands, and guided her out. Gus returned from the kitchen. "Burner's off. Main line is stiff. I don't like the smell." "Can you shut it?" Trying again. No hero work. Gus gave him a look. "I am too old to die because a pipe wanted drama." He disappeared back toward the kitchen. The floor beneath Holt's wheels gave a soft pop. He looked down. The old boards near the edge of the kitchen passage shifted. Not much. Enough. The storeroom floor, already disturbed by the hidden cellar and whatever Cal had done below, seemed to settle with a low, wooden complaint. Sable heard it too. He turned. Most of the customers were outside now, clustered under awnings, confused and murmuring. Lacey stood at the door, counting aloud under her breath. Opal was pushing the last reluctant farmer toward the exit with one hand and carrying a pie with the other, because even disaster had standards. "Holt," Mara called from the sidewalk. "Come on." He angled his chair toward the front. The right wheel rolled clean. The left followed. The small front caster struck a warped plank near the kitchen threshold and dropped into a split that had not been there moments before. The chair jerked. Hard. Pain did not travel from Holt's legs, but shock moved through the rest of him. His hands locked on the rims. He tried to reverse. The caster held. He shifted his weight. Tried again. The split widened with a dry crack. "Holt!" Lacey shouted. "I'm stuck," he said. Calm, because calm was the rope everyone else could hold. Sable was near the front door, almost outside. The dog looked back. For a heartbeat, the old German shepherd stood in the open doorway, mist behind him, festival lights burning gold beyond his dark body. Then he turned and ran back into the diner. Opal shouted something. Mara tried to step forward. Lacey grabbed her arm. The smell of gas thickened by one terrible degree. Holt lowered his hand toward Sable as the dog reached him. Eyes bright, shoulders tense, ready for a command. Outside, the festival kept playing. Inside, the old floor held Holt like a secret it refused to release. The diner had gone too quiet. Not silent. Silence would have been kinder. Outside, Sweet Home's Autumn Festival still played its cheerful lie. The bluegrass band kept going under the tent. Children called to one another through the mist. Somewhere down Main Street, a tractor horn gave a ridiculous little honk, and someone laughed. Inside Truesdale Diner, the air felt heavy enough to press fingerprints into. Holt Renwick sat trapped near the kitchen passage, both hands locked on the rims of his wheelchair. The front caster had dropped into a split between two warped boards where the old floor had buckled. He had tried reversing twice. Each attempt only made the chair jerk harder and the wood complain beneath him. The smell of gas had become clearer now. Not overwhelming. Worse than that. Noticeable. A thin, bitter warning beneath the sweetness of hazelnut pie and old coffee. Sable stood in front of Holt, silver muzzle lifted, amber eyes bright with focus. The German shepherd's right shoulder trembled slightly. Holt saw it. Of course he saw it. The old injury always betrayed Sable when the weather turned cold, and today the mist had crawled into every bone of the town. Still, the dog had come back, almost outside, almost safe, then back. Sable, Holt said quietly. The dog's ears locked on him. Outside the front door, Lacey Ward shouted, "Holt!" "Stay back," Holt called. "You are stuck in a gas leak. I am not taking customer service instructions from you right now." Despite everything, Holt almost smiled. Mara appeared behind Lacey, yellow raincoat bright against the gray street. Her face had gone pale in a way Holt remembered from hospital rooms. Opal was at her shoulder, smaller than both women, but with one hand gripping a pie server like she might stab fate if it came too close. Gus Okafor blocked the doorway with his broad body. "Everybody out of the threshold," Gus said. "No sparks, no switches, no heroic idiocy." Opal tried to push past him. "That is my employee. That is your gas leak. That is my diner. And I am trying very hard to keep both from becoming a story people tell badly." The floor gave another soft crack beneath Holt's chair. Sable turned his head toward the sound, then back to Holt. Holt breathed once. In. Out. Panic was afire. If he fed it, everyone outside would burn faster than anything inside. He looked at the room the way he had looked at rooms long ago, when every second had weight, and fear was only one piece of equipment among many. Front door, clear but farther, floor sloping toward the split. Kitchen side door, closer, partially open, Gus had already wedged it from outside. Path, narrow but possible. Obstacle, caster lodged. Resources, Sable, Lacey, maybe Gus from the outside edge. Risk, gas, unstable floor, electrical spark, old cellar below. Holt lowered his voice. "Sable, tool bag." The German shepherd turned immediately. On the back of Holt's chair hung a small black utility pouch. Sable had carried it before, dragged it across floors, brought it when Holt dropped tools at home. Not a miracle. Training, repetition. Trust turned into motion. Sable caught the pouch strap in his teeth and pulled. The chair shifted half an inch. The caster remained caught. "Easy," Holt said. "Not straight back." Sable froze. "Good dog." Holt reached behind him, unhooked the pouch, and dropped it beside the wheel. His fingers found the short rubber doorstop he kept for ramps that did not deserve the name. Too small to solve this. Maybe enough to change the angle. He tried leaning left. The chair resisted. Outside, Lacey dropped to her knees near the side kitchen entrance, peering in through the lower gap. "I can reach you from here if you get turned," she said. "No, you stay outside. I did not come back from Portland to be bossed around by a man losing an argument with flooring." Lacey. Holt. For one sharp second, they stared at each other across the narrowing distance between danger and stubbornness. Then Holt said, "Broom handle, not your hands." She vanished. Gus's voice came from the side door. "Main valve is stiff. I got it halfway. Not enough. Fire department's been called." "Who called?" Holt asked. "Mara." "Good." She also threatened the dispatcher with clinical accuracy. Mara shouted from outside. "I was polite." Opal snapped. "You said you knew where every artery was." "That is educational." The exchange struck absurdly against the danger, and that was why it helped. People could breathe when they could still be ridiculous. Sable nudged the rubber doorstop with his nose. Holt picked it up. "Matt," he said. The dog looked toward the counter. "Rubber mat, bring." Sable turned and limped fast toward the counter. The old anti-fatigue mat lay partly rolled near the register where Holt kept it to stop his wheels from slipping on wet days. Sable grabbed the edge in his teeth. For a moment, his shoulder faltered. Holt saw the pain move through him. "Sable, leave it." The dog did not. He pulled again, stubborn as winter. The mat scraped across the tile, slow and ugly and beautiful. Every inch cost him. Holt's throat tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "Good. Bring it. Easy." At the side door, Lacey reappeared with a broom handle. Gus stayed behind her, one arm ready to haul her back by the apron if needed. Opal was still near the front, counting people under her breath, because even in terror, she trusted arithmetic. Outside, sirens began to cry in the distance. Low at first, then rising. The sound should have comforted Holt. Instead, it reminded him there was not enough time to wait for professionals to do what could still be done now. Sable reached him with the mat and dropped it. Holt hooked the edge with one hand and shoved it toward the trapped caster. The floor dipped again, making the split open like a dark mouth. He could see it now. Not just cracked wood, but the empty throat beneath. The cellar space shifting after whatever Cal Rusk had disturbed below. The past was not buried anymore. It had teeth. "Lacey," Holt said, "when I say, press the board down with the handle, not hard enough to break it, just enough to flatten the lip." She nodded, face pale, eyes fierce. "Sable," Holt said, "pull pouch strap, angle right." The dog took the strap again. "Mara," Holt called. "I'm here." "Keep Opal back." Opal barked, "I am not a child." "No," Holt said. "You're the owner. Stay alive to yell at us later." That did what begging would not. Opal stopped fighting Gus and stood rigid in the doorway, eyes blazing. Holt placed the rubber doorstop under the edge of the caster and jammed the mat beneath the wheel with his left hand. "On 3, he said. Sable braced. Lacey set the broom handle against the curled board. Holt leaned his weight to the right, arms ready. 1. The gas smell thickened. 2. The sirens grew louder. 3. Lacey pushed. Sable pulled. Holt drove both wheels hard. The caster rose, slipped, caught again. For a breath, nothing moved. Then the wheel jumped free. The chair lurched sideways toward the kitchen door. Sable lost his grip and stumbled, his bad shoulder dropping. Holt grabbed the counter edge and kept from tipping. "Again," he said. "No," Lacey gasped. "You're clear enough. Turn toward me." He did, slowly. The floor behind him popped with another wooden crack. Gus reached through the side doorway with one long arm. "Give me the chair frame. Do not pull me over. I have fixed pipes more delicate than you." That is not reassuring. It was not meant to be. Gus grabbed the lower frame. Lacey hooked the broom handle behind the footplate and guided without touching metal against metal. Sable pressed his body against the right wheel, not pushing hard, just steadying, keeping Holt's angle true. Together they moved inch by inch. The kitchen side door widened. Mist touched Holt's face. Fresh air, 5 feet, 3, 1. Then Gus hauled the chair over the threshold with a grunt that sounded half like effort and half like insult. Holt rolled onto the wet concrete outside. Lacey fell back onto the alley pavement, laughing once in a broken, breathless way. Sable came after him, not at once. The German shepherd stopped just inside the doorway and looked back toward the storeroom. "Sable," Holt said. This time, There was no command in his voice, only fear. The dog turned and stepped out. The moment his paws hit the alley, a deep sound came from beneath the rear of the diner. Not an explosion like in movies. No fireball, no flying bodies, no thunderclap throwing people through windows. It was worse for being real. A heavy, muffled thud. The building shuddered. The rear wall coughed dust. Glass rattled in its frames. A gray breath of smoke and old flour blew out through the kitchen doorway. Somewhere inside, wood collapsed with a long, splintering groan, as if the diner had finally dropped a weight it had been carrying for too many years. Opal made a sound Holt had never heard from her. Not a scream. A wounded inhale. "My kitchen," she whispered. Gus put a hand on her shoulder. Still standing. She looked at the building, then at Holt, then at Sable, whose black and brown coat had gone dusty along the spine, whose silver muzzle was now marked with gray powder. Opal swallowed. "Everybody out?" Holt nodded. "Everybody." Only then did her knees bend. Mara caught her under one arm. Lacey took the other. Firefighters arrived moments later, moving fast but not frantic, their yellow coats bright against the mist. Deputy Elena Marquez pulled in behind the first engine, stepping from her county SUV with her hair still tied low and her face already set into work. She took in the scene. Evacuated customers clustered under awnings, smoke from the rear, Holt in the alley, Sable beside him. Opal staring at the diner like a woman watching an old friend on an operating table. Elena came to Holt first. "Anyone inside?" "No." "Gas source?" "Back room or below?" Gus got the main partly shut, possible tampering from cellar access. Her eyes sharpened. "Cal?" Seen in the alley before the smell. She wrote nothing down yet. She simply absorbed. Firefighters moved through the rear entrance after confirming the gas level had dropped enough for limited access. Gus spoke to them in quick, precise terms, pointing out the old line and patched wall. Elena sent 2 deputies to secure the alley. The festival had stopped pretending now. People gathered in a wide half-circle, murmuring. The bluegrass band had gone silent. Children clung to parents. Mrs. Bellamy stood beneath the pharmacy awning with a paper plate of pie in both hands, looking offended at disaster for arriving before she finished. Roy Detweiler appeared from the crowd with the face of a man rehearsed in public concern. "What happened?" he called. "Opal, are you all right?" No one answered him immediately. That, more than any accusation, changed the air. Detweiler seemed to feel it. He moved toward the firefighters, but Elena stepped into his path. "Councilman," she said, polite as a locked door. "Please remain behind the line. I'm only trying to help." "I appreciate that. Behind the line." His eyes flicked past her toward the rear alley, toward the patched wall, toward the place where Cal Rusk should not have been. 2 deputies came around the corner then, guiding Cal from the alley. He was not handcuffed yet, but he looked smaller than he had in the diner doorway. His brown work jacket was dusted with gray. One sleeve bore a smear of soot. His cap was missing. His face shone with sweat despite the cold. "I didn't do nothing," Cal said loudly. Nobody had asked him. Elena turned slowly. "Mr. Rusk," she said. "That is usually a sentence people save until after the question." Cal's mouth opened, then shut. Detweiler's expression did something tiny and revealing. It abandoned him. Only Holt seemed to catch it. Holt and Sable. The German shepherd stood before Holt's wheelchair, body dusty, shoulder trembling, gaze fixed not on Cal, but on Detweiler. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He merely stood with the terrible patience of a verdict waiting to be read. Later, when the gas was controlled and the rear was stabilized enough for investigators to enter, the firefighters found the cellar exposed beneath the collapsed section of storeroom floor. What the fall had destroyed, it had also revealed. The waterproof boxes had survived. Some were scorched. One had cracked. A ledger lay half open beneath a broken shelf, its protective wrapping melted along the edge but not gone. Bundles of cash, sealed in plastic, sat among old bottles from another century. A folder labeled Rusk Civic Renewal had been shoved beneath a loose board, as if someone had tried to hide it in a hurry. Elena photographed everything before anyone moved it. Holt watched from the alley entrance, barred from going closer but no longer feeling useless for it. This scene did not need his legs. It needed what he had already given it. Order, restraint, witnesses, time. A firefighter carried out a scorched ledger in an evidence tray and handed it to Elena. She opened it only after gloving up, careful with the brittle pages. The first visible sheet showed columns of payments, contractor initials, project codes, and signatures. Elena's eyes moved down the page. Stopped. She looked once toward Detweiler, who stood beyond the line with his public face badly repaired. Then she looked at Holt. Near the bottom of the page, beneath a series of false payment approvals for Sweet Home Renewal Corridor Phase 2, was a clean, practiced signature. Roy Detweiler. The mist thickened over Main Street. No one cheered. Real justice rarely arrived with trumpets. Sometimes it came coughing out of a broken wall, smelling of gas and wet ash, carried in a gloved hand while an old dog stood guard before a man in a wheelchair. Holt rested one hand on Sable's dusty head. The dog leaned against his wheel. This time, neither of them had been left behind. Justice did not arrive in Sweet Home with a trumpet. It came in county vehicles on wet mornings, in cardboard evidence boxes, in quiet interviews held behind closed doors. It came through bank records, contractor filings, inspection reports, copies of grant applications, and the kind of signatures men forgot they had left behind because they had grown too comfortable being believed. For 3 days after the collapse, Truesdale Diner stood wounded on Main Street. Yellow tape guarded the back alley. The rear wall was braced with temporary beams. A blue tarp covered part of the roofline where rain had begun finding its way through. The old neon sign in front remained dark, and that seemed to trouble the town more than anyone expected. People were used to seeing that sign, even those who complained about Opal's coffee, especially those who complained about it. Holt Renwick spent those first days mostly behind a folding table set up in the untouched front half of the diner, helping Deputy Elena Marquez organize what he had seen and what he had written down. He was not an investigator. Elena made that clear. But his notes had become a map, time of cellar discovery, names present, photos taken, no items moved, Cal Rusk seen in alley, gas odor, evacuation, collapse, evidence recovered. Elena, Lacey Ward said on the second afternoon, sliding a paper cup of coffee across the table. For the record, if this becomes a documentary, I want someone taller to play me. Elena did not look up from the file. For the record, documentaries usually prefer accuracy. That was hurtful. It was factual. Lacey pointed at Holt. See? This is why she scares me. She weaponizes calm. Holt glanced at Elena. She does. Elena allowed the smallest smile, then returned to the documents. The evidence did not rely on one burned ledger. That mattered. Elena pulled county filings that matched payment codes from the cellar books. Gus Okafor gave copies of old invoices showing work billed at impossible rates. Inspectors confirmed that projects marked as completed had never been finished. Lacey turned over the photos from the night the cellar was discovered and gave her statement about seeing Cal Rusk near the rear access on festival day. Opal brought the old loan papers. She carried them in Earl's dented metal box and placed them on Elena's table without ceremony. Then she stood there, one hand on the lid, and did not let go. Holt saw the effort it took. Those papers were not just evidence. They were the last ugly weather system of her marriage, the part of Earl's love that had become debt because he had tried to protect her by hiding the storm. He thought he was saving the place, Opal said. Elena's voice softened, but only slightly. That may help explain how Detweiler gained leverage. I'm not asking for Earl to look smart. No, ma'am. I'm asking for him to look human. Elena nodded. That I can do. Opal released the box. The arrest of Roy Detweiler happened before sunrise on a Thursday. By then, Cal Rusk had begun talking. Not nobly, not because his conscience bloomed like spring after decades underground. Cal talked because Detweiler tried to bury him first. When faced with the possibility of carrying the whole weight alone, Cal turned on the man whose hand had always rested gently between his shoulder blades while pushing him toward the edge. He described the shell companies, the inflated drainage contracts, the fake roof repairs, the community access upgrades billed to grants and never completed. He described the cellar beneath Truesdale Diner, the old side access behind the patched brick, and how Detweiler had used it as a private vault because no one would suspect a struggling diner owned by an old woman. He also admitted he had gone into the cellar during the festival to destroy selected documents. The gas line, he insisted, was an accident. Elena did not argue. She wrote that down, too. When Detweiler was led from his house in a dark coat and no tie, Sweet Home did not cheer. It watched from porches, pickup trucks, diner windows, and the edge of sidewalks. His hair was still neatly combed. His face was still composed. But without the council room, without the handshake, without the polished sentences, he looked smaller. Not weak, just mortal. Mrs. Bellamy, standing beneath an umbrella outside the pharmacy, said loudly, "I never liked his shoes." Nobody knew what to do with that, so several people nodded as if it were an important civic statement. The investigation spread wider after that. Those who had been afraid began remembering things. A contractor who had lost a bid spoke up about altered paperwork. A clerk from the town office turned over copies of emails she had quietly saved. Gus produced a folder so thick it looked like it had been waiting 20 years for permission to become evidence. "You kept all this?" Holt asked him. Gus tapped the folder. "A good plumber never throws away proof that somebody else lied about a pipe. And here I thought you were sentimental." "I am. About pipes." The diner remained closed for repairs, but it was not empty. That was the strange miracle of the following week. People came. At first they came carefully, as if visiting a sick relative. Then they came with tools. Farmers brought lumber from barns. A retired electrician named Lou Anders rewired the neon sign and complained the entire time that whoever had last touched it should be charged separately. High school students painted a temporary sign that read, "Truesdale Diner," still standing, though Opal made them redo it because one of them had dotted the I with a heart. "I run a diner," she said, "not a Valentine factory." They changed the heart to a small coffee cup. She allowed that. Women from the church brought casseroles for the workers. Someone donated a stack of chairs. Someone else brought insulation. A boy who had once asked if Sable missed being needed came with his mother and offered the dog a biscuit shaped like a bone. Sable accepted it with the solemn gravity of a king receiving tribute. Holt watched the town arrive piece by piece. He had spent nearly a year believing Sweet Home was a wall of closed doors. Now he saw it had also been a place full of people waiting for someone else to be brave first. That did not excuse them, but it made them human, which was often more complicated. On the fourth repair day, Milt Carver came. He arrived late in the afternoon in his old work vest and ball cap, carrying a box of hinges, screws, drawer slides, brackets, and small metal fittings. He stood near the entrance longer than necessary, pretending to study the damaged threshold. Holt was near the counter, checking a delivery list. Sable lay beside him, one eye half open. Milt cleared his throat. "Brought some parts." Holt looked up. "I see that. Good hinges, not the cheap kind. Useful. Figured the back storage door might need rebuilding." "Probably will." Milt shifted the box in his arms. He looked older than Holt remembered from Carver farm parts. Or maybe guilt made men stand differently. "I said a thing to you," Milt said. "You said several." "At the store." Holt waited. Milt tugged at the brim of his cap, then forced his hand down as if tired of hiding under it. "I looked at the chair before I looked at you." The words were plain, awkward, unpolished. They landed harder because of that. Holt could have made it easy for him. He could have said it was fine, said he understood, said no harm done. People often handed the wounded a second job, making everyone else comfortable. He did not take it. "Yes," Holt said. "You did." Milt swallowed. Sable opened both eyes. After a long moment, Milt nodded. I'm sorry." The apology did not fix the year Holt had spent outside doorways. It did not erase the polite refusals, the lowered glances, the way people praised his service while declining his presence. But it did something small and necessary. It made one man tell the truth. Holt reached for the box. "You know how to install those?" Milt looked surprised. "Of course." "Then don't just donate them. Put them in right." A rough relief moved across Milt's face. "Yes, sir." "I'm not sir." Milt almost smiled. "You are today." Holt let that pass. Near the coffee machine, Lacey wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and pretended she had dust in them. Opal saw her and said, "If you cry on my clean counter, you're polishing it twice." "I am emotionally dehydrated," Lacey said. "Good. Saves napkins." The cellar was sealed after investigators finished, not hidden again. Sealed. That had been Opal's decision. When the builders repaired the storeroom floor, she insisted on leaving one rectangular section covered with reinforced glass. Beneath it, a clean, lit portion of the old stone cellar remained visible. Old bottles, part of a shelf, brickwork from another century, and the empty space where stolen money had once sat. The first time Holt saw it, he said, "You sure?" Opal stood with her arms folded. "People walked over it for years. They didn't know." That's my point. The glass was not a monument to crime. It was a warning against forgetting too easily. The reopened diner did not look new, and that pleased Opal. The stools were still red. The counter still bore scratches. The coffee still inspired criticism from Mrs. Bellamy, who claimed the collapse had not improved it. The neon sign glowed again, repaired but still slightly uneven, as if the building wanted everyone to know it had survived without becoming arrogant. On the morning before reopening, Opal called Holt into the office. It was barely an office. A closet with ambition, a desk, 2 filing cabinets, a wall calendar, Earl's old framed fishing photo, and a chair no one trusted. Holt rolled in and found Opal standing beside the desk with a folder in her hand. "No," he said. She frowned. "I haven't said anything." "You have paperwork. I'm preemptively suspicious." "Smart. That's why I'm doing this." She handed him the folder. Inside was a job description. Operations manager, day shift, vendor logs, staff scheduling, safety checks, cash reconciliation, accessibility improvements, training, records. Holt read it twice. "This is more than cashier work." "Yes." "You need someone full-time?" "I need someone who sees the room before the room knows it needs seeing." He looked up. Opal's expression was hard, but not cold. "This isn't charity," she said. "I know." "Do you?" He closed the folder. For a moment, the old fear rose, that accepting meant needing, that needing meant weakness, that the world would always place opportunity in his hands like a blanket over a patient. Opal seemed to read enough of it to become annoyed. "Don't insult me by acting like I'm kind enough to pay a man for decoration," she said. A laugh escaped him before he could stop it. She nodded, satisfied. Then her voice changed. Not softer exactly. Truer. "You are not a burden, Holt. You were the only one who believed me before the town stopped being afraid." He looked down at the folder. Words had injured him before. These did not heal everything. But they entered cleanly, like rain into thirsty ground. Reopening morning came with light rain. Of course it did. Mara arrived early and stood outside beneath her yellow raincoat, watching through the window as Holt checked the register, reviewed the delivery sheet, and adjusted the small ramp mat near the entrance. She did not rush in to help. She did not ask whether he needed anything. That was how Holt knew she was trying. When he finally looked up, she raised one hand. He smiled. Not the polite smile he had used for months to keep her from worrying. A real one. Lacey tied on her apron and announced she had enrolled in a basic bookkeeping class, because apparently numbers are just gossip with consequences. Gus sat at the counter with coffee he claimed was terrible and drank anyway. Milt installed the last hinge on the storage door and only corrected himself twice when he nearly called Holt "Sir." Opal unlocked the front door. The bell rang. Mrs. Bellamy entered first. "Naturally," Opal said. "I came to inspect the coffee." "It failed yesterday." "I know. I'm checking for consistency." Behind her came farmers, truckers, families, old men, children, people who had helped rebuild and people who simply needed breakfast. One by one, they crossed the threshold. Some looked down at the glass panel in the repaired storeroom floor when Opal let them peek later. Some grew quiet. Some said nothing at all. That was fine. Not every lesson needed a speech. Holt took his place behind the counter. Sable lay near the front, silver muzzle on his paws, V-notched ear tilted toward the room. His right shoulder still stiffened when the rain came, but his eyes remained bright, watching every arrival with ancient seriousness. A boy near the door whispered to his mother, "Is that the dog who saved everyone?" Sable sighed, as if fame were a burden he had long expected. Holt heard and looked down. "You'll survive," he told him. Sable thumped his tail once. Outside, the hazelnut orchards lay under mist, their rows fading into gray like old lines in an unfinished hymn. Sweet Home did not look transformed. It looked repaired, which was better. Transformation could be a costume. Repair showed the seams and dared the world to call them ugly. Holt slid the brass key into the register, the same key Opal had placed before him on his first day. It turned smoothly. Coffee steamed. Bacon hissed. Rain tapped the windows. Lacey laughed too loudly at something Gus said. Opal yelled at someone for blocking the pie case. Mara stood outside for one more second, hand pressed to her chest, then came in. Holt looked around the diner, at the counter, at the glass over the cellar, at the dog guarding the door, at the people who had not saved him all at once, but had helped build a place where he no longer had to prove he deserved a chair at the table. For years, he had believed belonging was a thing a man earned by standing firm. Now he knew better. Sometimes belonging was a threshold rebuilt after the floor gave way. Sometimes it was a key in the hand, a dog at the door, and rain on the windows of a diner that refused to die. Sometimes, the place where we feel most broken becomes the very place where grace finds us. Holt thought his life had been reduced to a chair, a quiet room, and doors that would not open. But God still had work for his hands, wisdom for his scars, and a loyal old dog to remind him that being wounded is not the same as being useless. Maybe in your own life, there is a part of you that feels forgotten, overlooked, or set aside. But even there, hope can still rise. Sometimes it comes as a second chance, sometimes as a faithful friend, sometimes as one small door opening in the rain. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe stories like this still matter, please subscribe and stay with us for the next one. May peace find your home, may courage return to your heart, and may you never forget. What is broken can still become a shelter for others.